Welcome to Predator Radio, your exclusive podcast channel for everything predator hunting related. Predator Radio is brought to us today by our sponsor, Predator Precision. Predator Precision offers a full line of thermal and night vision optics, as well as thermal accessories. Check them out on the web at www.predatorprecision.com. Hi, welcome to another episode of Predator Radio. We're here today with James Bostock of Boss Predator Acoustics, and I've asked James to come on board today with us because of his extensive knowledge and background, specifically on calling and predator sounds. So, as I mentioned with each episode, our goal with season 1 is to help new people who are trying to get into predator hunting, get them the information they need to be more successful, and as I say, cut down the learning curve. So one of the things that helped me when I got started was I had bought a sound pack this before I knew James, but he had recommended his sounds. I had bought a sound pack from him, and I had threw it on. Then I was only using one call. I was using a Fox Pro call. I threw it on my Shockwave, and at the time I wasn't super successful. I threw some of his sounds on there, and stuff started to work. So I knew I was onto something. Over time, I've got the opportunity to speak with James on a few different things, and realized that his knowledge base on calling is something that every time I talk to him, I'm able to learn something new. So I want to bring that to you guys. So we've got James on board, right?
Yep. Hello, guys.
Hey, thanks for taking the time to help us with this. I know that I understand you've been hunting late nights the past few nights and got a funny sleep schedule. I think I woke you up for this podcast, so I really appreciate you pushing through here for me.
Not a problem. I enjoy the community, and I'm really glad to be here with you. So, a few hours sleep is probably all I need. Everybody says I'm somewhat a vampire. So,
well,
if you look at my skin tone compared to my nephew, and in our photos online on Facebook and social media, you're going to see that I'm the pale one.
Well, I appreciate you taking time so we can all learn from you. So, James, can you first kind of give everybody a background for those of the people that don't know who you are, a little background on who you are, what you got, and kind of how you got to where you are today?
You betcha. Well, I started coyote hunting probably as a kid, and but I didn't fall in love with it until probably about 12 to 13 years ago. And what happened basically, it was kind of a progression. I really loved elk and deer hunting, and probably for me, nights was the biggest thing that just changed my feel for coyote hunting. There are guys that love hunting days, guys that love hunting nights, and some guys do both. I'm just pretty much a night guy. I will go out during the day sometimes, but my brother took ill, and I ended up he couldn't keep up with me for scouting deer and elk, and I bought one of those big old Raytheon Thermal Eye 250D thermal scanners to help us scouting, because we'd be walking, do a lot of hiking, and I'd look behind me, he'd be 80 yards behind me, and I was having a conversation with him, and I wasn't getting a reply, and I turned back, and there he was, like, way back there. And so I got that thermal scanner, and it was like this big law enforcement military thing. I mean, they were expensive, like $8,000, and I didn't spend that much on it. I found one on eBay and offered the guy like $2,500, and he came back with me and said he'd sell it for $25 about a week later, and by then I only had $2,100 left. And I told him that, and he was like, "Okay, I'll sell for $21." So that got my first thermal scanner, really successful for deer and elk. Then after the first day of season, we both filled our tags, and I was like, "Hey man, we could use this for coyote hunting." So we went out the next morning, and I couldn't believe the difference in the number of coyotes we were just seeing popping their heads up above the sage compared to day hunting. Because apparently, my eyes aren't that good, and they just blend in really nicely in the sage out here.
Gotcha.
So we came home that night, and it was like, you know what, we could use this for night hunting. And then that just trickled in. I ended up getting night vision. We did that for a number of years, like 6 years or so. And then I rolled over to thermal optics on the rifle. And, man, I've just been, since I got my first night coyote, I mean, it was our first stand. We got a coyote, and I knew right then I just loved it. And that was pretty much it for me.
That's awesome.
And so, yeah, this whole thing kind of spiraled from there. And I've always been a technical guy. I've been building computers for about 25 years. Even though I've got my master's in counseling, I kind of fell in love with computers at the same time and didn't want to change my degree. I was already a year into my master's in counseling. And so it was like, wow, you don't just roll over to another thing. So I pushed through that. But I've always done both, and I've been a manager at Dell, so really had the technical side down. And what I found was I had that old it was a Fox Pro Spitfire, held 20 sounds, and that's kind of how the whole sound thing got going for me. And what happened was 20 sounds isn't a lot when you're out in the field, and they get burned up pretty quick. Coyotes get educated, and so I looking at how much memory it had, I realized, hey man, this thing will hold a lot of sounds. I mean, it has a capacity to hold a lot of sounds, but they limit you to 20. So I started making sequences, and we'd go out and record coyote vocals, etc., and get sounds, and then I'd make 20 sequences, and I could go out there and just play those, and it gave me a lot more versatility in the field. And I did that for a lot of years, and once I got a Fusion and I held 1,000 sounds, I didn't see the, I didn't need sequences anymore. I really wanted to break things down into just sounds. And so I just kept making sounds because, they're so expensive. And the fact is, it's just nice to have more versatility on your call. I mean, I just think a guy that has more to choose from when he's in the field is just going to be a lot more effective. Especially if he knows his choices, has them organized well on his call, and can kind of match tone. I do a lot of tone matching and things like that. So if I'm doing an interrogation howl and it's a female and she's high pitched, I'll probably try to stay with a high pitch. If I'm going to roll over to say barks or challenge barks and howls, then I'm going to probably stay with a high pitched female for that, because I want to sound like I'm the same coyote. If I start moving to a throatier or a more gravelly sounding female, then it's going to sound like I got two coyotes out there. And here, with our coyotes, they're pretty cowardly. So I try to make it stay as, as less aggressive as possible. And
Gotcha.
So that's kind of how this whole thing got rolling. I never planned to sell sounds. I shared them with a couple guys on Facebook about a year or so ago. I was making some, and they were asking if I was going to go out, and I was like, well, when I get done with this sound, they were like, what do you mean? What do you mean when you get done with your sound? And I was like, well, I'll make sounds. And they were like, well, hell, send it to me when you get done. So I already had like 5 or 6 cranked out. So I just sent them what I had and kept sending them as I made them through the summer. And they're the ones who encouraged me to start selling my sounds. So that's kind of how the whole gig got rolling.
Well, that's awesome. And when you say, just so our listeners know, talk about sage and where you're at, you're west.
Oh, yeah. Out here in Idaho. I'm in the southern desert plains of Idaho along the Snake River.
Okay.
And so we've got a lot. It's agriculturally based, so we've got a lot of fields. We've got tons of fields that border on sage, which I really love to hunt those particular environments where you've got the sagebrush, because it's good traffic. Basically, coyotes use it as their thoroughfares. They use we've got tons of canals because we're in a desert, so they've got to disperse water out there for those fields, etc. And so basically during the dry season, so like during the fall and winter, those are empty, and coyotes use those as thoroughfares as well. They'll travel through them from place to place. They'll duck into them and And so just really terrific place to hunt coyotes. There's a lot of them out here. So, and there's a big need. Lots of ranchers, dairymen, and sheep herders, etc. So,
Neat. So, what kind of diving into it here, what I wanted to pick your brain on is communicating with the coyote. So, one of the biggest questions I see people asking online, and when I talk to people, and I take some new hunters out with me. Most people know I hunt by myself pretty much exclusively, but sometimes somebody will tag along with me, and a lot of times it's a newer person that wants to kind of get into it.
Oh, yeah.
And one of their big questions is like, it's general and from kind of lack of knowledge. What sounds work, or how do you know what to play? So I know when we talked for a few minutes before this podcast, I said I wanted to go over kind of sounds and stuff like that, and then the more advanced part of motivating a coyote communication. You brought up a really good point of you wanted to kind of flip that around and go over the behavior and what I consider to be the advanced part. You wanted to go over first, I guess, as the basic part, which I think is really interesting. And a lot of people, myself included, I think are thinking of things backwards. So if you can kind of explain the process, I'm going to kind of just give this to you and let you roll with it, of the process of sounds that motivate a coyote versus what a person thinks the sound they want to hear, I guess.
Okay, you bet. Yeah. Like we were talking before, when I go out to a stand, I'm never thinking about what sound do I want to play. That's not the first thought. And I think, I get a lot of guys saying, hey, could you build me a sequence? Do you sell sequences? And I don't, because I think it really limits a guy's flexibility when he's out on stand. Because the things that I'm looking at, the first thing I'm trying to figure out is what motivator and motivation am I trying to trigger on these coyotes? And, that is going to determine which sounds I'm going to play and how I'm going to set up and start that stand. And sometimes you can tap more than one motivation at the same time. Sometimes you can, if a particular trigger isn't working for a motivator, you can roll over to a different motivator to choose, okay, what other motivation am I going to try to work on? And then that's going to dictate which sounds you're going to choose and what sound categories you're going to want to go to. So I always look at it like that. So I really think for me, I had a lot of misconceptions when I first started hunting coyotes. I had in my mind what I thought would work, and it made sense to me logically as a human being. I just thought, okay, this makes sense. I'm going to start out with an interrogation howl. And that way, one, I can locate coyotes, if there are any in the area that are, at distance, I'll be able to determine where they are, at what distance, not all coyotes are going to respond, obviously, but, some are going to. And so I'll be able to then follow up. So if I started, let's say, with an interrogation howl, well, then I could roll over to, say, rabbit. And in my mind, that would say, hey, I'm in your territory. They might not like that. Okay, now I'm eating your food. Okay, they're probably not going to like that. So what I found was when I got thermal, I'm out there in the field, and I've got 4 coyotes out there. I remember the first time this happened, and they're about 600-700 yards away. So I start out, I play a female interrogation howl, and I just lead like that, and I watch these 4 coyotes just start to leave this field. It's a huge field, and there's a ditch bank that runs right in the middle, and they start leaving. And didn't matter what I did, they would not come back. I was like, wow, how cowardly are these cubs? What is going on? Oh, yeah. It blew my mind, honestly. And what I realized is I was probably dealing with interlopers, because I watched them go all the way across that field. They crossed the dirt road and under the fence, and then they hung out there on the other side of the fence. So I knew, okay, we got a property issue. But the thing that was disconcerting to me was my whole process for for calling coyotes, I realized that wasn't a great strategy. And that what I did was I said, basically, I announced, hey, I'm home. They didn't know that I didn't own that property. They just knew they didn't. So they got out of there.
Right.
So what I've done is that was a misconception I had. And so really what I've done over the last probably decade of night hunting or so is really just watch coyote behavior, the body language. Really, the thermal's just been a gift for being able to view them and really watch what my sounds are doing and how they respond to them. And that, to me, has made just a big difference, a massive difference in how I view coyote behavior and the motivators that I see that seem to trigger them. And so that's kind of why I did that whole segue into that. So, so really, when I'm looking at motivators, the primary one guys are always thinking about is hunger. I mean, that is a primary survival motivator for coyotes. They have to eat in order to survive and in order to mate and to get to estrus in order to, breed and have a litter and move on. And hunger is going to be one of those primary things. And that's why there are tons of distress sounds out there. You've got, rabbit, vole squeaks. I mean, you name it, there's tons of them, and they're effective. Okay, they're effective all year because coyotes have to eat all year in order to, fulfill that kind of
fill their tummies.
Biological imperative.
Yep.
If that makes sense. So, and a lot of guys are just prey guys. I've had guys contact me. They never use coyote vocals ever. And I can understand that to a certain degree because it depends on the coyote's disposition in your territory. I think it's really important to know your coyotes. Are they aggressive? Are they non-aggressive? Because if you start playing, like I've had some guys in Michigan say, if I do anything more than interrogation howl, it's over. So if I use an aggressive sound, those coyotes are gone. So, and that's where guys start kind of saying, I'm just going to stay with hunger. But the downside of that is you're only using one motivator. You're only using one motivator to call in coyotes. And so you're missing a massive other opportunities to bring in coyotes that you can't bring in for hunger. Because some coyotes, I mean, if say I've got to go, say they're a long ways away and maybe you're 800 yards out there and you're running, bull squeaks or rabbit or whatever. Well, 800 yards might be too far for them to go. If I've got to go like 5 miles to go get a McDonald's hamburger, I might not get in the car to do that.
Right.
But if I've just got to go down the street, I'm more likely to do that. I'm more likely to go get that food. And if my wife were to bring in a McDonald's hamburger and say, hey, you want a hamburger? Even if I'm not hungry, I might eat the damn thing. Right. You see what I'm saying? So I'm always talking to guys about proximity. Some guys really feel like they're doing something wrong on stand when they're really doing everything right. Even with hunger, they're trying to tap that motivator. They get those coyotes. They're just checking up. They're not coming in, and it could be a territorial issue. They may be at the edge of what they consider their boundary. They're kind of like dogs. Dogs will mark, you got a dog. It'll mark your entire fence line. The next door neighbor's dog, it'll mark its entire fence line. Each one knows where its territory starts and ends.
Right.
Okay. And they know when they cross into somebody else's territories, but they do it all the time. If you got a dog, it'll come, it's loose. It'll come over and crap in your yard, but it knows that's not its yard.
Right.
It'll come sniff around. It might even try to mark your territory to say, hey, I'm taking possession of this. And coyotes are kind of the same way. So I think the real thing is, if you're looking at motivators, hunger is one of those primary ones, but then you're limited if you just stay with that. I feel like that. I mean, I guess that's my opinion. I think a guy that just stays with hunger only really is kind of tying his hands in some ways, and he's reducing the number of coyotes that he's going to bring into stand throughout the year.
All right. So what other motivators, you've touched on hunger, what other motivators are there to work with?
Great question. So The next one I'm always looking at is protection of territory and resources. So we just talked about how coyotes know their territory, right? So if you get too close to a coyote's territory and you're using coyote vocals, well, they're going to give you a certain response to that. Usually it's not a very positive one. So if you start encroaching into their territory and you start working their resources, they need those resources to survive. Okay.
Right.
So they're not going to like somebody in their territory eating their food. So it'd be like if you're sitting here at your house, right? And you look out on the back porch and some guy's standing in your backyard.
Right.
And you're like, dude, what's that do? You might be looking out the window. You're filling up a cup of water, getting coffee or something. You look out your window, like, what is that guy doing out there? And then you might go open the door and ask him, but you might be the kind of guy just to just watch and say, what is he gonna do? You know? But imagine that guy comes over, opens your grill, and takes a chicken leg off the grill, starts eating it. Well, I guarantee you're probably going to go out and deal with that situation.
Right.
So the cool thing about territory and resources is that you can use sounds that stimulate the motivation for hunger and protection of territory, and you can put those two together, and you come up with you're triggering that protection of territory and resources. So it works really good if you start getting into, like, say, denning, when they're denning up, like right about now when you got pups being born. Yep. You start getting close to their den, they're going to be real protective. So you start using coyote vocals close to their den, and there's some other things like pup distress and what have you. We'll get into that in a second. They're going to get real antsy. They're not going to like the fact that you're in there. So it's a good way to trigger coyotes. They're going to want to come in and tell you to stay out of their area, and you'll hear it. You'll hear the barks and challenge barks and howls they'll send back. That's usually when I get some of my best sounds, is in the summer when everything's denned up, and I try to get in close enough so that they're vocal, but not so close that they're going to come in and get silent on me, you know, and try to push me out of their area. So protection, territory, and resources, real strong motivator for coyotes. And then you got protection of family. That's where coyotes and pup distress, you know, like a lot of guys will set their call, like a fox pro calls, especially with fox bang. They'll set those up to run either coyotes, which is an adult coyote in pain or yelping, okay, or pup distress, which is, you know, obviously a pup that's crying out for help. And they'll set those up on fox bang. So after the shot, you hear that distress sound. And coyotes, a lot of times you can bring in a coyote after the shot to come in and see what's going on and try to, you know, they think their partner or their you know, their somebody in their family unit has been hurt, and they're going to come in to try to deal with that. So you might get another coyote coming in to stand after you've already shot. So real effective means for motivating coyotes to come in. And so, and pup distress is really good, especially, you know, some guys say it only works in summer. I've found that, man, with that particular sound, it works all year long on females. And you can kind of tell in the middle of the winter, you run pup distress, a male, a lot of times, he'll look at you, but he usually won't get very vocal.
Right.
And they may come in, but I've seen more males than not. I can tell a male and a female usually, because the female will come in. It's just like if you're in the parking lot of Walmart or something and some baby's crying, you know, and you're walking with your wife, she's like, oh, well, what's going on? You know, she's looking around and you're just like, let's go shopping, baby.
Right.
Let's get this over with. And coyotes
maternal instinct kicks in.
Yeah, I think it's hardwired into females. And you can see that in coyotes too. So, but during those summer months when you got the pups out and they're either at the den or they've moved to like a staging area where the parents are out hunting, and those coyotes pups have been placed in an area to kind of wander around and you know, look around. Man, a pup distress is protection of family. It's a really good motivator to trigger a response and bring in coyotes. So After that, you got what I've seen in the field, and there may be other motivators, but these are the ones that I've seen and that I use to trigger coyotes. Um, so we've got hunger, protection of territory and resources, protection of family. Then we got estrus, which is, you know, usually out here in the West, and I can't say all areas, but around the third week of January in my area is when our coyotes start to move into estrus. So that's another way to trigger coyotes. You start using estrus chirps. You start using whimpers. Rick Pillay, he's got some really good, breeding sounds. Talk dirty, sniff it, and those kind of sounds really get a response during that window where coyotes are breeding. And female, I like to use a lot of female interrogation howls because one, other females won't want coyotes in their area. So if you start running female howls, a lot of times a female will come in to move you out.
Right.
Okay, because she doesn't want any competition for any of the males that are out there for breeding. It also attracts males, so it's just a female vocals in those situations really nice. You can pair things up. I mean, there's just a lot of flexibility when you're running estrus. You can run a really loud female howl, and then you can run a really quiet male howl as a response. Wait a little bit, do another really loud female howl. Bring up the volume on that male howl a little bit louder, like he's getting closer, and you move him on in, and then you can move over to whimpers, things like that. So estrus is one, and then and so sex, I just call it sex, is another motivator. And then you've got, let's see, I'm sorry for my apology.
Sorry, we got food,
and then you got curiosity.
Yeah.
Coyotes are crazy, curious animals. So, and the thing is, and this one's kind of hard to explain because guys watching coyote behavior in the field, a lot of times, say I start out with a female interrogation howl, I roll over to some aggressive kind of a challenge barks and howls from her, even if no coyotes are responding, and then I immediately roll over to pup distress. Okay. Well, I've watched coyotes that were checked up at about 700 yards or so out along the sagebrush and the fence, and there were 4 of them, and their body language was just stressed out. I mean, you could tell there was one alpha there sitting by the fence. There were 2 others. They were just you could just tell they're moving back and forth, and there's one kind of moving back in the stage and just popping his head up, and they're just stressed out. And what happened is I rolled over to pup distress, and just right after my last challenge, and what happens is the coyote that was sitting there by the fence, they all came to the fence, and their body language totally relaxed. Okay, 2 of them ducked under the fence, and they start just strolling in. So you'd think that, okay, I'm doing protection of a right family. I went to pup distress, right? That's a protection of family sound, right? But no, I was triggering curiosity because if I was triggering that protection of family, they'd have come in hard.
Right.
They'd have come in fast.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yep, exactly.
So a lot of guys, when you're playing a sound like that, if you got coyotes coming in casual, well, they're not coming in for protection of family. They're coming in for curiosity.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, and that kind of goes back to in one of my previous episodes, we talked about how much you can learn just while calling and how much the thermals have allowed us to see and watch the
Absolutely.
coyote's behavior during calling. So that kind of it makes sense to what you're saying of, I've always kind of gone on the theory of if a sound is working, stay with that sound. But this really takes it a step further and says, watch what the dog's doing and manipulate their behavior through the sound. And how many times do you see that their behavior changes partway through? Like, is your theory when that sound works, you played pup distress as you were just talking, and the dog starts to mosey in. Do you stay with pup distress and keep pulling them in on the string?
Absolutely.
Okay. Is there a time that you would change so that they get partway in and for some reason lose interest? what do you do there?
Well, I see that sometimes with when I'm running rabbit or like prey distress. Sometimes, rarely does that happen if I'm running like pup distress and they've already started to come in. If they've been checked up and I've rolled over and triggered something to bring them in,
Right.
then typically, some guys will just keep playing the sound constant. What I'll do is I'll stop the sound and then watch them. If they start to lose interest, then I'll hit that sound again, and I'll probably just leave it running. If they're moving when the sound's playing, I'll keep playing the sound. If they start checking up, I might go quiet and just wait. Be a little patient. A lot of times, sometimes even after I've played pup distress, I'm not seeing anything. I'll shut off the call and wait 4 minutes, maybe 5 minutes, and just watch. Because sometimes a coyote might be afraid to show its face when that like pup distress is going on,
Sure.
or when that commotion is happening.
Right.
And they're curious. They want to come in, but they're just if you've got nervous coyotes or non-aggressive coyotes, then sometimes they're going to hold back. So by going quiet, maybe even 5-10 minutes, sometimes you'll have coyotes that all of a sudden want to come in to see what just occurred over there.
Absolutely.
They want to put their nose on it. They're going to want to take a look and see what's happening.
Yeah.
And so curiosity is a really good trigger, and you can use it in a lot of different ways.
Yeah. I call those the after the fact coyotes. And one of the tips that one of the tips that I always try to give is, even after, I always try to, obviously we all slip into a set as quiet as possible. I also try to slip back out of the set as quiet as possible. And
absolutely.
I'm kind of an analytical nerd. I track all my stats of what sounds work and where I'm at and all that. But I also track at what point in the stand do I get my kills, and I log that in an app. And about 15% of my kills I get after I've got back to the truck. And what I do is I get back to the truck before I open my door. My truck has those stupid automatic running boards that come down automatically. So as soon as I open my door, lights come on, that the running board comes down. It's pretty well blown. So I always make it, excuse me, I always make it a habit to scan one more time before I get in the truck. And about 12 to 15% of the time that works. There's one that just straggled in, and I call him the after the fact dog, that he didn't, like you said, he was nervous. He didn't want to come during the confrontation, but curiosity, he just wanted to see what happened. And they don't know who else is coming in during that confrontation. We see that a lot with like den raid or a sound similar to that.
Oh yeah.
I've called in 2 or 3 groups before. One group will commit, and the other 2 groups already know somebody's there, and they're just there to wait and see what happens. So that's a really good point that I think people probably overlook. I know I overlooked for a long time, was the manipulating their behavior, and being patient. And that's one of the biggest questions I think people have is a sound's working. Do I keep playing it? Do I hit pause? Let them come in on their own. Here, excuse me, where you're at, Western dogs, it's really rural, and you're out in the middle of nowhere. Here in the East, or at least in Ohio, where I hunt, it's all flat land. For the most part, but we're hunting around houses. I mean, there's at any given point, you can see, a lot of the plots I hunt on, it may be a 20, 30 acre field, and it backs up against 3 other fields the same size. But regardless, within 1,500 yards, 2,000 yards of where I'm at, there could be 2 or 3 houses. So there's a lot more distractions. Like when you say out your way that, the dogs, once they commit, they generally come in. I think that has a lot to do with the environment. Where here in the East,
absolutely.
Here in the East, I've had, if they come running in, they're committed. They usually keep coming in. But here, stragglers, inevitably, they'll be trotting in. You think, I've got them on a string. They're coming in. And then somebody about 3 farms down slams a car door. and they stop.
Oh my gosh.
Or a
Yeah.
car drives
Oh,
by.
yeah.
And the car could drive by half a mile to the other side, and they'll stop. They don't necessarily run off, but around here, they're so easily distracted, is what we find. So it's neat to kind of understand what you're explaining is when you find that, I call it their trigger, but they're flipping their switch. When you find that motivator, or tapping into that motivator, will definitely, I can see how that would make people more successful. That's golden. That's golden information. It seems like.
I really think it helps. It's helped me, I should say, in bringing in coyotes. And I'll get on to the last one really quickly. It's ego. So the last motivator is ego, and you're going to find those coyotes that, if you live in an area where you've got really aggressive coyotes, or you've got an alpha, and you usually can hear it in the tenor of their voice. Even females, you're going to have some females that are the alpha of the pack, and they will let you know. You can kind of hear that gravel in their voice. They've got that deeper tone to them. When you hear it, you know it.
Right.
And once you've heard a couple alphas, you got it down. And they really have a strong stance. And so, like, ego is another great motivator, because I rarely get like a real alpha dog, because our dogs just are not very aggressive out here. So they're very non-confrontational. But occasionally, probably 2-3 times a year, I will get one. And when I get one, it totally changes my calling sequence. I will stay aggressive with that coyote. It's just like the bully at school.
Right.
If you want that bully at school to come and mess with you, start telling him off. Call him a dipshit, whatever. You know how to bring him into you. Interrupt him when he starts saying something. Cut over him. And you're gonna push those buttons on him to bring him in. And so that, like, ego is one of those things that I definitely use. And certainly there are areas around the nation where you've got more aggressive coyotes. It's like the difference between living in maybe a rural community and then going downtown, in Jersey or New York, the Bronx or something like that. You walk out there, you say the wrong word to anybody there, you're going to have 5 guys around you.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yep.
So, knowing your coyotes and knowing those motivators, I'm going to go through them really quick again. You got hunger, protection of territory and resources, protection of family. You got sex, curiosity, and ego. And I think, and I've tried to really analyze it and look at it to find other motivators, but those are the ones that I always come back to. Those are the ones that seem to produce results for me. And I was a guy, for a while, my wife was really ill. She had Crohn's, and she was struggling. We had about 5 years of that. And so I might only get to do 1 or 2 stands. So I couldn't be one of those guys that went and did 15, 20 stands to get a coyote.
Right.
Yeah. I went out there. I really paid attention to what I was doing. I wanted to go out and do 1 or 2 stands to get a coyote, and then it kind of cleaned the slate for me. Just being out cleaned the slate in a lot of ways, just wiped the whole week away. It was like starting fresh. But I really was working on trying to improve my processes so that when I went out, I would be successful. And usually it only takes me 1 or 2 stands to get a coyote. That's pretty common. And we don't get big numbers out here. That's a whole different conversation about how coyotes are geared to survive. So whatever they're going to do to survive, they're going to do it. And so that's why you have bigger packs in some areas, where you have smaller packs, or you have a lot of singles or doubles in other areas. And that's all geared towards their survival mechanism. We don't have very big packs out here typically. For me to see 5 is like a rare occasion. 4 even sometimes is rare, unless you're talking pups and what have you. And that's a whole different situation. I'm talking about a family unit that has, more than 3 coyotes. That's not very common out here. I'll do a lot of stands. I bring a lot of singles, and I bring in, this time of year, you bring a lot of doubles in because they've paired up.
Right.
But normally, once those family units break down in the fall, I will start seeing tons of singles, just single. And if I get a triple, it's like, whoa, triple. and I look at some guys back east, and I'm just always kind of blown away. It's like I watch 6 or 7 or 8 coyotes, and I'm just like, oh my God, what would
Yeah,
that be
it's
like?
different out
You
here.
know?
If we get spots that I got a spot that when I was getting ready for land to hunt the Eastern Championship
Hmm.
in January, we got kind of weathered out. So I had a lot of land that I didn't get to hit for the tournament that was just, might as well hunt it afterwards. So I had one spot that was where they grow forestry. The local lumber mill owns the property, and I had field up against it. And the first time I went there, I let out one howl, and 9 dogs come running out. I didn't know.
Oh my
I didn't
Lord.
know which way. I've got video of it. Man, and that one, believe it or not, I didn't even shoot at any of them. I realized that
Oh my.
they just came out like the little clowns at the circus out of a car. Like they just kept pouring out. And so I figured, I need to come back. I almost always hunt alone. I said, I need to come back with a couple more shooters. And we came back the next time. I had 2 other people with me. And, it's rare that I have a group of 3. But 3 of us went out there and we cleaned up pretty good in that woods. But it was one of those
Oh
cases
man.
of out here, it's not uncommon. A couple months ago, I had a stand that was by myself, and 5 came in, and a bunch of lucky shooting. I ended up taking 3 of the 5. But here, it's not uncommon to have 4, 5, 6 of them come in at once. So
Yeah,
we're kind
that
of
would, it's always exciting. I tell you, really, my blood doesn't get up anymore. I love coyote hunting, and I still, when I have a single coming in, I'm feeling good. But I don't get buck fever anymore until I get like about 4 coyotes coming in,
yeah,
and then I'm thinking, oh my gosh, and I can feel it. I have to start taking deep breaths, calm
yeah,
myself back down, just get focused on what I'm doing so that I don't blow that stand.
yeah,
And but yeah, it's really fun and interesting to watch other guys hunt. I think that's one thing I love about like the Facebook community and the YouTube and the Instagram is the guys sharing what they're doing across the nation, and it's just really enjoyable to be a part of that
yeah,
and to be able to share in that because before all this technology, when I was a kid, there wasn't even a coyote hunting magazine. I mean,
right,
you kind of had to learn from somebody else, or you just had to go out and do trial and error. And I really like the format where you can try to help other guys out and try to give them a context. Like everything that I'm talking about motivations, it's just one framework for the way to look at coyote hunting. And I think if you find any guy that kills coyotes consistently, okay, he's got a methodology, whether he knows it or not. He's got a framework. And like say I'm a counselor, right?
mm-hmm.
I got my master's in counseling. So when I'm out there looking at coyotes, I'm always looking at motivators, right? What motivations, and then I'm looking at communication. I've got this device and I'm communicating with these coyotes. And so that's kind of from that counseling standpoint. Probably that's why I look at it that way. If I was a mechanic, I might look at my sounds as parts that I put together in a certain way, and then things work, right?
Right,
If I put these parts together in a certain order and in a certain way, then things work for me. So I really think it's not necessarily a guy needs to take my framework. I think what needs to happen is a guy develops some sort of framework that makes sense to him and looks at the things that are functional and uses those and builds on those, and looks at the things that are not functional and gets rid of those. And the more a guy does that, the more a guy weeds those 2 things out, the more successful he's going to be in stand. So
makes sense. So can you kind of change gears a little bit, touch on a lot of people I know have questions on like sound intensity. So it kind of goes along with the motivation stuff you're talking about, but one of the biggest questions I see people asking about is sound intensity, the sound proportionate to the sound source, and overall, like I think a lot of people call too loud, or maybe I'm the guy that calls too soft at every stand. I don't know. I know my style is I don't call as loud as other people. When I go with other people, our kind of general rule of thumb around here is whoever's land it is, they're the ones that call. So sometimes I'll tag along with somebody else, and I'm thinking, man, like that is the coyotes in the next county can hear that. So maybe I'm the guy doing it wrong. I don't know. But can you kind of touch on sound intensity and how that plays into things?
Yeah, I'm actually going to reverse this a little bit, okay? Because I think you brought in two different kind of things that are going on. And so let's talk about just the loudness of the sound itself. So for me, I'm hunting some big open territory. Some of the fields that I hunt are a mile long, okay. And we've got a lot of desert out here. It's just wide open space. And so a lot of times I like to have a loud call. And when I had my Fox Pro Fusion, and sometimes on the desert, we'd be out there, and I'd crank that thing all the way up, and nothing. And I'd pull out one of my loud hand calls, and I'd start cranking on that thing. And the next thing you know, we got, boom, 2 coyotes up on a ridge looking at us. Boom, now they're coming down, And then I'd switch back to my Fox Pro, bring the sound down a little bit. But usually when I start a sound, I think one of the dangers of using a loud call is if you start too loud and there's coyotes that are close, you can scare them away,
right,
because you crank up a rabbit really loud, they're going to know, holy crap, it's going to sound like it's right on top of them. To them, their ears are way better than ours.
It's going to sound like a 125-pound rabbit.
Yeah, it sounds like, a rabbit on, with a loud horn or something, and they're like, it's just going to freak them out, and they know that's not right. So I think probably it's wiser if you're going to start out with a distress sound is to start out quiet. If you start out like 30% volume, maybe 40 at most, maybe even less, 20, and just see if you get any bites. Okay. And if not, then you can start increasing the volume, pushing that sound out there further and further so that a coyote, because it's the proximity thing again. The closer that meal appears to be, the more they are apt to come, right?
Right.
So if that meal appears to be 5 miles away, they might not be as interested in it. But if it sounds like it's just down the block, they may be more interested. And that's why I always talk to guys when they got coyotes checking up on the edge of a field. They may be hitting a territorial line. I'm like, get in closer to them. Mark that on your map. Get in closer to them next time. Reduce, or get yourself more proximate to those coyotes. And the odds are you're more apt to bring them in, either for distress sounds or even coyote vocals, etc. So don't consider that a failure. When you're out in the field, if you got coyotes checking up and you just can't seem to get any traction, don't sit there and keep playing sound after sound after sound. Okay? Call it good, mark it on your map, next time get in closer. And if at that time you can get in closer, because sometimes you can move your position, you can get your call, you can move in closer to their location and do it without being seen or heard, well then do it.
Right.
Do it right then. But if not, mark it on your map, go in there later. So I think sound is one of those things, the volume is something to adjust. So I'll increase my volume. And I really wish there was a call with sound modulation on it. It's something that I've always wished either Fox Pro or Icotech or, Lucky Duck or somebody would come out. I think the Lucky Duck, the Revolution and Revolt are really nice because they do modulate that sound because the actual speaker turns as it's calling, right? So say it's pointed to the left, it's going to be louder there. All of a sudden it points to the right. Well, now on the left side, that volume went down, right? Because now the sound's being broadcast over here to the right. So it's kind of a built-in sound modulation, but they could do that very easily with software so that when you say go to, say, sound level 7, okay? But you don't want a continual 7. Instead of you have to work the volume up and volume down, volume up and volume down, because I want it to sound natural. Sure. And some sounds are pretty static when it comes to their volume. And so they'll be like, it'll be wah, 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 and it just stays at that volume. And you're like, and I want it to go wah, 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 wah. You get louder, and softer. So I'm sitting there thumbing those buttons making that sound go up and down because it sounds more natural. If a rabbit's crying, it's not always going to be facing one direction and crying in that direction. It's going to have its face up and down, and it might be turned around the other way. And so I think that's one of the beauties of those Lucky Duck Revolution Revolt is that it's got that built-in modulation just by the feature of that call rotating. Really, really smart idea. So volume I do think is critical. I think for me, if you're going to use coyote vocals though, this is the exception to that start quiet thing. Coyotes are freaking loud. Man, they are loud. If you've ever had, I know all these guys the guys that are new might not know this. I've always had guys who are like, man, that coyote's like got to be 100 yards away. Well, no, it was like 700 yards away.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yep.
Have you ever taken new guys out and they feel like the coyotes are right on top of them?
Oh yeah.
Yep. And it's because they're so loud. So I always recommend push that sound as if you're running a coyote interrogation now, you push it as loud as your call can handle it. And, and that's where it's nice to have a good loud call. Mm-hmm. If you run vocals, and I recommend running them at, like I'll run my outlaw at 90% or 100% if I'm running interrogation howls. And so that's the exception to that. And then if I do interrogation barks and howls, usually I'll back it off to 7 or 8, so 70% or 80% volume. And so that's the one exception. So that's volume. So let's get on to intensity, because you did ask about that, right?
Yes.
Okay. So sound intensity is one of those things that I really think is important. And I'm going to use pup distress as a perfect example of this, just because it's a really nice way. And then we'll use rabbit too. So den raid, this is Tony Tebby's sound. He's got den raid 1, I think he's got den raid 2, and maybe a den raid 3. It's basically a sound where you got a pup and then you've got a coyote attacking that pup, and there's growls and pup screams, etc. And what I do is when I look at a pup distress sound, I kind of rate it on intensity. I don't do it like 1 to 10. I usually do it just low, medium, high. Okay, so you're gonna have to forgive me on this. Okay, like I wouldn't start out with a high intensity sound like that. Tony Tebby's den raid. If you guys haven't listened to it, you need to go to Predator University and go find it and listen to it. And probably be a good one to have on your call. But that's a real high intensity sound. When you listen to it, it's like crazy commotion. This pup is freaking out, and there's a lot of hysterics going on there. Yep. Okay. Well, I would rarely start with that. Okay. I normally will start with a low intensity pup distress. And there's a couple reasons why. One is, when you start out with a low intensity sound, it's more like, kind of like, it's, there's not a lot of like intensity happening in that sound. And the thing is, I like to build my sounds. Okay. I like to start out with low intensity and then work my way to high intensity. So if I'm not getting any traction with low intensity sound, then I maybe move up to a medium intensity sound. It might be pup screams or something. And then I'm not getting any traction with that, or I've got coyotes and they're checking up. They're excited, but they don't want to come in. They're just then I might bump it up to a higher intensity sound like den raid. Or I did an ode to den raid because I was so impressed with that sound, and I like the way it works. Tony's a genius for coming up with it. I would have never thought a sound like that would have been effective, and just a great sound. And there are other, I think Icotech's got Den Attack, and people have copied that sound, mm-hmm. But I think Tony was the first one that came out with that. But really great high intensity sound. And so they're kind of like Hail Marys, and you don't want to waste a Hail Mary right off the bat. Yeah. Because the thing is, once a guy pulls a trigger on a coyote, so say you've got, in your situation where you got those 8 or 9 coyotes coming in, right? And you take 3 guys out there with you. If you don't clean house, if you don't kill all of them, those coyotes that are left, they know that sound. They just had a really traumatic experience, man.
Right.
Trust me. You've been shot at, and you're running around the field trying to get away, right? And boom, 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 people are shooting at you. All of a sudden, half your pack is gone. Well, you think the next time you hear that sound, it's not going to cause some sort of fear or,
Right.
because in those coyotes, see, that sound is burned now. So better to use a low intensity sound and save that. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Yep. And on a little, if I can kind of get sidetracked here for just a second while I'm thinking.
Oh, heck yeah.
On a little side note, where I was talking about, I keep a lot of statistics on everything. So I use one app for my mapping. I use OnX. I use a different app
me too.
for my kills. I use Hunt Stand. It has a harvest module, so I can overlay the two maps and all that. But one of the things that it just kind of made me think to mention it, on Hunt Stand, when I log a harvest, I put what call I was playing that brought the dog in and what I shot. Now, of course, everybody, I shoot all suppressed. Anybody who hunts with me shoots suppressed. But still, it creates, and this kind of falls back on a little bit of my police canine training job, that it creates, in at least a domestic dog, what's called an aversion. Once a dog has an aversion to something, it's permanently imprinted in their brain. So like if a puppy slips on a slick floor when they're a puppy, that's how we end up with these police dogs that we get from Europe, that they're afraid of a slick floor, they're afraid of a dark room or something. It's because something bad happened on a slick floor or in a dark room, and that's permanently ingrained in their brain. And we call that a negative aversion. You can actually have a positive and negative aversion. So we call that a negative aversion. So what I do is I log the sound that I shot over at every stand. And if I didn't, and then I have a little symbol that I put, basically if there's more dogs there that I did not get. So the reason I do that is when I go to a stand, I look, see if I've killed anything there before. If I have, and let's say I was playing Den Raid, I'm not going to play Den Raid at that stand again, because I've educated.
Man, you and I are
right. I've educated those dogs, or I've educated those coyotes and created a negative aversion to that sound. So I know it sounds like a lot of work in keeping track of all this data, but I'm also a big proponent on adding a bunch of little things. Each of these little things help you. There's a whole
add up.
Yeah, there's a whole controversy on do you wear camo? Do you scent this, that? Any of those things probably don't matter much in themselves. I did a episode with Jason Grossclose, and he hunts with Tory Cook. Those guys go down in Georgia and wear jeans and a white T-shirt and stand out in the woods and shoot coyotes all day long. And then I've got all this camo and everything. So my point with that is it's not that any one thing may help you a bunch. It's that all these little things add up. And I think
I totally agree.
I think marking your aversions and knowing what sounds you've shot over is one of the bigger things that you can throw in the mix. So I didn't mean to get you sidetracked.
It absolutely is.
Yeah.
No. That's a great point.
I wanted to touch on that.
The first jackrabbit sound that had any kind of intensity to it was back in the day. Foxborough came out with it. It was called, everybody's probably heard of it. It's called Lightning Jack.
Yep.
And man, I remember when that came out, I killed a slew of coyotes. But what I found is, man, it didn't take long before that sound had no effect. Matter of fact, I'd play that sound, I'd watch coyotes run out of the field. Yeah. And I was like, and that's really why I made my Jack Smack sounds. And I actually have 3 or 4 of those. I've got 3 Jack Smack and 1 Jack Whalen, and they're all very similar, but they're different rabbit sounds. They're different. I would use one till it was burnt out, then I made another, and I'd use that one till it was burnt out, then I made another. And coyotes, I always liken it like this. Guys might be like, no, that's a bunch of BS. But here's what I'm saying. If a guy's driving in his car, okay, and all of a sudden Back in Black comes on the radio, and he gets T-boned, boom, this horrible accident. Maybe he lost a wife and a child in this accident, or everybody got hurt or whatever. And about 6 months later, he's at the coffee shop, and all of a sudden, the first time since that accident, all of a sudden, Back in Black comes on the radio. Where did his mind just go?
Right.
It went to that accident.
Yep.
Immediately. Sounds and songs and take people back to memories that they had. They become connected. It's called the law of contiguity. Two things closely associated in time become connected. So even though that rabbit sound or that pup distress or whatever you were playing really had nothing to do with that coyote being shot, I mean, it brought him in, but because that sound was playing, that sound that you started shooting on, or the sound that played right after you shot, if you got like fox bang and you always cue up this sound, that became imprinted in that animal's mind.
Right.
And it is going to create a negative experience, and you're less apt to bring an animal in. I totally track my sounds when I kill on stand. Absolutely. What sound was I playing when right before the shot, or during the shot, or right after the shot? And I'll keep track of those. And if any got away, I will not use that until the next season's litter comes back. And that's why I like having a lot of sounds on my call. So that's a really great point.
Absolutely.
And
if people just,
I think one that, yeah,
if people just track those sounds, and I think to reiterate your point is, I think people underestimate that first of all, everybody knows coyotes and domestic dogs are very similar. So, in dog training, whether it be either pet training or police canine training, I always preach in seminars and in my company that dogs are masters of association. But to a domestic dog, everything's either positive or negative. There is no real middle of the road. Food is good. Certain things are bad. Somebody yelling is bad. So coyotes in the wild are going to associate everything with either something good or bad, and they're going to react accordingly. So it's the same reason that your dog's waiting for you at the front window when you pull in. They understand the sound of your vehicle the same as we understand a voice. So
yeah, they know it
then
too.
Something good happens, right? Mom, dad comes through the front door. And so now what led up to that good? And they start to learn what are the things that happened previous to that good or bad event. So the same thing in hunting, it kind of reiterates the importance of slipping in quietly to the stand. I personally like hunting around livestock. I have good luck with it.
Yeah.
I feel like I'm helping that farmer more than the guy that's just has a cornfield or bean field. So, but try getting a 16-foot steel gate open with a chain around it at 3:00 in the morning without making it peep. It's nearly impossible.
Oh, I know.
But
drives me crazy
right.
sometimes.
But the reason I'm so weird, people are like, man, you're taking 2 minutes, you're taking forever to get this gate open. Well, imagine if, and my land, let me back up a little bit. A lot of my land, especially livestock stuff, I hunt the same spot 2-3 times a month, and I hunt year round. So I hunt 4 to 5 nights a week, and I hunt 12 months out of the year. So I'm hitting a lot of my spots on a regular basis. So imagine if every time I shoot a coyote there, before that they heard a chain rattle against metal. Now the next couple times I show up there, what's going to happen when they hear a chain rattle against metal? They already know what's going to happen.
Absolutely.
Something's going to die. So I think if people, that brings up a really good point. If people understand that the coyotes are the masters of association and they're associating everything with good or bad, it's hard for us as people to put something out there that a coyote's going to associate with good, short of throwing food out there or something for it. Like, I don't know how a coyote would associate anything with anything positive. All we're doing out there
probably
is
a bait pile.
Right.
Bait pile.
Right. Yeah.
Yep.
Other than that, we're giving them negative markers, negative associations. So the fewer of those we can give them, the more successful we'll be. So yeah, that brings up that's a really good point that I'm glad you touched on that.
Yep. And there's one more thing. I know we're getting pretty close to the end. We've been talking for a while.
That's okay. We're fine.
One last thing is that guys are always saying, hey, can I have my truck there? And my thing is, do I need to how far do I need to get away from my truck, or, et cetera. And the thing is that what I found is if there are a lot of trucks in the area, coyotes are not concerned with them. It's like tractor equipment. We have got guys out here running tractors, and there'll be coyotes standing in the field just running out there, in the field. If that guy doesn't carry a gun in his tractor and shoot at those coyotes, he'll be, plowing the field or whatever, and they'll just be out there in the field running around mousing or whatever. And so I always listen, if there are a lot of vehicles in your area, don't worry about your vehicle.
Right.
That's not a big deal. Do worry about the noise you make, like the ding, ding, ding when you leave your, or slamming doors and things like that, but if they just hear a vehicle pulling up or pulling by and then it goes quiet, not a big deal. It's all those other associated sounds that you kind of want to avoid. But the vehicle, you might even be able to set up stand. I've done it before where I pulled in my truck. The moon was big. It was a full moon, but it was low in the sky, and my truck is actually cast in a shadow. And I will set up my tripod and stand right there in the shadow of my truck and hunt from there, and been successful.
Yeah.
So, but if I'm in the middle of the desert and there isn't a lot of traffic, well, then that truck is a dead giveaway, driving around and making noise and leaving it out where they can see it. Well, then that's going to work against a fella, So good point.
Yeah. Well, so let's kind of wrap up this for today. And what we're going to do is carry this over to episode 2. So, folks, if you're listening, you should see right below this episode, this is episode 4, I believe. You should see episode 5, which is going to be continuation. So, folks, stick with us, and we're going to roll this right into another episode.